Exercise 12.3.
Listen again to the professor's comment. Then answer the question.
First, I just want to say good job on your presentation, Charlie. It was very interesting. And then, I just want to add this. You said you weren't sure why the planet Venus was named after the goddess of love. It's true, Venus was the goddess of love, but she was also the goddess of beauty. And, anyone who's ever seen Venus early in the morning or in the evening knows it's a beautiful sight.
Question 1. Why does the professor say this?
I just want to add this.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Computers have been used since the 60s to record choreography. The first one I know about anyway, was a program written by Michael Knoll. And it was, I guess by today's standards, you'd say it was pretty primitive. The dancers looked like stick figures in a child's drawing.
Question 2. What does the woman mean when she says this?
The dancers looked like stick figures in a child's drawing.
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Well, after Rhine did his experiments at Duke, a lot of similar experiments have been done at Stanford University, in Scotland, and elsewhere, and the conclusion, most researchers have decided that Rhine's results were, I guess the kindest word I could use is questionable.
Question 3. What does the professor mean when he says this?
Most researchers have decided that Rhine's results were, I guess the kindest word I could use is questionable.
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
So that's why you don't believe in ESP?
To put it in a nutshell, I've just never seen any experimental proof for ESP that stood up to careful examination.
Question 4. Why does the professor say this?
To put it in a nutshell,
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Yeah, I've seen that painting before. I don't remember the name of the artist, but I think the painting is called Nighthawks at the Diner?
Yeah, a lot of people call it that, but the real name of the painting is just Nighthawks.
Question 5. What does the professor mean when she says this?
A lot of people call it that, but the real name of the painting is just Nighthawks.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Now, if you happen to have a copy of the syllabus that I gave you last week, you'll notice that we're not going to be able to... We just don't have time to read all of these 2 poems and talk about them. An epic poem, I probably don't have to tell you this, is a narrative poem, a really long narrative poem.
Question 6. What does the professor mean when she says this?
I probably don't have to tell you this.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Anyway, the main characters in the Iliad, they're strong. They're great warriors. But they're not as clever, not as smart as Odysseus. He's the one who thinks up the plan to end the war. after 10 long years and defeat the Trojans. He's the mastermind behind the scheme to build the Trojan horse.
Question 7. What does the professor mean when she says this?
He's the mastermind behind the scheme to build the Trojan horse.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
How does HDR energy work? Well, in theory anyway, and let me stress I say in theory, it's pretty simple. You use oil well drilling equipment, big drills, and you punch 2 holes down into the earth about, maybe 2 miles, 5 kilometers maybe. That's about as far as you can drill into the earth for now at least. Down there, deep in the earth, there is this extremely hot cauldron of rock, of granite. So then, you pump water from the surface into the first tube. The water goes down to the hot rock and becomes superheated. Then, the superheated water rises up the second tube. I forgot to mention that these 2 tubes are interconnected. This hot water rises up the other tube and you use that to heat up a volatile liquid. Do I need to go into what I mean by that? No. Okay. So then this volatile liquid turns into a vapor, a gas, and you use it to turn an electrical turbine and, bingo, you have electricity.
Question 8. Why does the professor say this?
How does HDR energy work? Well, in theory anyway, and let me stress I say in theory, it's pretty simple.
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
So, what else happened at a potlatch?
Well, then the host would usually destroy some of his most valuable possessions, such as fishing canoes, and he'd throw coins and almost anything valuable into the sea.
What? Excuse me, Professor, I just don't get it. It just seems kind of crazy to me. Why would anyone want to host a party like that?
Question 9. What does the student mean when he says this?
Excuse me, Professor, I just don't get it.
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Okay, everyone, we've been talking about traditional forms of dance. Today, we're going to shift our attention to the islands of Hawaii and the most famous form of dance that's associated with those beautiful islands. Anyone know what that is? Laura?
Oh, that's an easy one. It's the hula dance.
Question 10. What does the student mean when she says this?
Oh, that's an easy one.
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Oh, by the way, in Hawaiian, the word ukulele means jumping flea.
Jumping flea, yeah? Why did they call it that?
Probably it was because, well, to tell you the truth, I don't have a clue. I'll try to find out for you, though.
Question 11. What does the professor mean when she says this?
To tell you the truth, I don't have a clue.
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Thank you, Professor Nugent. Thanks for inviting me. I always appreciate the chance to talk to students, to anyone who'll listen for that matter, about our disappearing battlefields. The organization I work with is trying to save battlefields from development. It's an uphill struggle. By one estimate, 25 acres of Civil War battlefield are being lost every day. That's like an acre an hour.
Question 12. What does the speaker mean when she says this?
It's an uphill struggle.
Listen again to part of the discussion. Then answer the question.
Can't we just read about these little battles in history books?
I'm going to jump in here, Francis, and comment on what David just said.
Question 13. What does Professor Nugent mean when he says this?
I'm going to jump in here, Francis, and comment on what David just said.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
A couple of days ago, we were talking about the poet Walt Whitman, and if you recall, I said that he was one of the two great voices in American poetry in the 19th century. Today, I'm going to drop the other shoe and talk about the other great poet, Emily Dickinson.
Question 14. What does the professor mean when she says this?
Today, I'm going to drop the other shoe.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Okay, for Friday, I'd like you to read all of Dickinson's poems that are in our textbook. There are about 20, maybe 25 of her poems in there. But don't worry, though. That may sound like a lot of reading, but it shouldn't take you long. Friday, we'll take a closer look at her poems.
Question 15. What does the professor mean when she says this?
Don't worry, though. That may sound like a lot of reading, but it shouldn't take you long.